to another Asking for a Friend. My name's Louise and this is my co-host Adam. Hi Adam, how are you?
Hello, Louise. I am very good, thank you. Very excited about today's podcast
Good. And tell me why you're excited.
because we have Lara on, our first guest.
We've got a guest and we're really excited. Good evening or morning, Lara. How are you?
I'm doing really well. I am currently in a city called Adelaide, so I'm away from home, but I'm in Australia. And I wanted to say, asking for a friend, were we actually modern slaves? That's what I'd like to talk about today.
That is a fantastic question. On that note then, Adam, can you remind us about the letter that you read last time that led us into this topic?
Yes, I can. So this was a letter to the elders, January 2025. And this is a part of the letter that is to be read out to congregations during the midweek meeting. It's talking about construction projects and maintenance projects. So for those that might not know, Jehovah's Witnesses build their own kingdom halls and maintain their own kingdom halls. The labour is provided free of charge by the members. And the announcement says, we are happy to announce that baptised and unbaptised exemplary publishers who are aged 15 to 17 may accompany their parents or legal guardian who has been invited to assist with and maintenance projects. So it seems like they may be running out of adults to provide free labour and turned to 15, 16 and 17-year-olds.
So that's quite interesting, Adam, because I remember working on a quick build assembly hall. I feel like I was younger than that, so maybe the law has changed. But did you work on construction sites when you were little?
Yes, I played in the sandpit. So for any listeners that can remember the Manchester Central quick build of 1988, I think it was, there were hundreds and hundreds of people providing free labour, building the hall, and there were so many children there that a sandpit was provided, and I spent most of my time in the sandpit, destroying sandcastles that the other children were building. So I think some years after that, children were effectively banned from building sites. But at the time it was a free for all.
God, Adam, that's the same one that I went to.
Oh right.
I didn't play in the sandpit, but then I was a bit older.
I was definitely in the sandpit, 1988, I think it was. Yeah.
Did you just realise you were at that sandpit and you didn't realise it before?
Well, I was older. I'm like, Adam's a nipper. He's a young un. I'm a mature lady.
Oh, right. No,
Well,
you weren't at the sandpit. Yeah. Adam, it's so nice to meet you.
I recently was shown a photograph of me on the building site when I was 5 years old. Unfortunately, it was in the possession of a witness, and I've got very little chance of getting my hands on it, so I don't have any photos.
Well, the benefit was, and we'll get into why this is important, but the benefit was that lots of us families or our parents took videos and photos of lots of children on the sites during those times because, of course, they were very proud. And you mentioned you had a sandpit. We had like a cricket ground set up and a creche essentially behind a wire fence. So there was a cookie cutter approach with these events.
That does bring us on to what we were going to talk about with you, Lara, which is modern slavery. Can you talk us through a bit of explaining what that is and then about the work that you've been doing around it?
Yes, I'd love to. I'll preface that just by telling everybody who doesn't know me that I've now been a whistleblower. I think this is my 9th year. I started in 2016 when I first made a submission to the Australian Royal Commission. And it was around about that time that I had this realisation about slave labour, child slave labour, I call it. But everything just got so busy with whistleblowing and activism that this sort of got left by the wayside. So for me, this has been a burning platform the whole time. But for others, it's probably only recently come to the fore as the child sexual abuse, I guess, interest in that is not waning per se, but there's space now to talk about other topics. So yes, I'd love to talk to you about it. So the way that I found out about it is, or the way that I had the realization is that I used to work in a job called procurement. And procurement basically is negotiation, contract management, and tendering. I essentially bought goods and services for large corporations. And as part of that work, I did training. And one of the training sessions that I joined was on modern slavery. And this is about a decade ago. So I'm sitting in the session and learning about how there's modern slavery in supply chains. And you'd recognize this. You know, everybody knows about sweatshops, and they may know about fishermen being used to catch fish and not being able to come back to land, and not getting their full pay. And you would also probably know about things like sex work and how they are coerced into, reduced pay or captured and forced to participate in sex work. So there's different areas of modern slavery. And I'm sitting in this session listening to all this, and I thought, well, I worked really hard as a Jehovah's Witness child, gardening, being in food preparation for assemblies, participating in selling magazines, literature from door to door for hours on a Saturday and a Sunday. I also worked, I guess, most particularly hard when I was cleaning bricks at an assembly hall called Melton, and other construction labour on quick builds, such as I built a road with my dad. I remember because I have a photo. And the two of us are not smiling, and we look very hot and dirty and tired. And so all of these memories started coming back about all the work people had done. And this was kind of in the context of Kingdom Halls and other properties starting to be sold off. And so, that's how I first became introduced to modern slavery. So sort of a definition of modern slavery is, you can find it on the International Labour Organization, which is part of the UN, or simply in the dictionary. And it describes or includes things like forced marriage. And I knew of two Jehovah's Witnesses who had been forced into marriage. That's part of modern slavery. And it also includes trafficking. So trafficking such as forcing people to move countries to work in another country for your benefit, and also forcing sex work across boundaries, like we know that, some of the infamous people have now been found sort of guilty of. All of these things I saw or am aware of from when I was a child in the Jehovah's Witnesses. And for clarity, I'm not just talking about the children. The adults, I say, were deceptively recruited into this. And so what struck me was, we do have a large child sexual abuse problem, but the issue of modern slavery affected virtually all of us. The enormity of the issue struck me.
Yeah, so I know when we've talked about it in the past, I've pushed back a bit, because I think I was just thinking about children. And I think, having heard your experience of how the kind of work you've done, that definitely sounds like a lot more work than I did. Apart from the selling the magazines, which we all engaged in, and you're right, that was until the magazines went free, which would have been most of our childhoods they were paid for. We were selling we were out selling, weren't we? Apart from that, from my personal experience, was just like a bit of hall cleaning, and then as a teenager, a bit of work on an assembly hall that we built. As an adult, I did a quick build, 2 quick builds. Adam, what was, I know you've kind of mentioned the sandpit. What was your experience of working for the organisation?
Yeah, I mean, just listening to what Lara was saying there, it made me think of some of the activities I was involved in as a child. My mum and dad became witnesses in the mid-80s, where I think there was quite a boom, really, and they really were quite enthusiastic about getting involved in whatever they could get involved in the organisation, be that selling magazines, witnessing, as they call it, helping build Kingdom Halls, Kingdom Hall cleaning, anything that they could get involved in, they did. And I was, most of the time, a willing participant. But I can remember sometimes where I did not want to go and clean the hall on a Friday evening, for example. I can remember physically being dragged. No wasn't an option. It was a case of, look, you are going to do this, and you haven't got a choice about it. And it was pretty much that way up until I was about maybe 13 or 14 when I was allowed to make my own mind up. So it does, yeah, it rings a few bells there with me.
Can I challenge you on that, Adam?
Yep.
You used the sentence, or part of the sentence you said, I was a willing participant.
Mm-hmm.
So I've revealed previously that I'm a child sexual abuse survivor. I'm not sure I've revealed that I was a willing participant. And what I was told by everyone, including the police, was a child can't consent. So if you were a child, even though you describe yourself as a willing participant, you can't consent. So nobody received your informed consent. Would you say that's correct?
I'd say, yeah, it's an interesting concept, I suppose, because it's your mother and father, isn't it? So they're not going to explain every little detail of the ins and outs of what you're going to be doing. And like you say, as a child, can you really consent to that? Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, but it's a legal issue, isn't it? Because like a child can't legally enter a binding contract, right? A child can't legally enter a marriage. A child can't legally have sex. Any sex with a child is rape, because there is no such thing as consent. It's not whether you think you're consenting or not. It's that legally there is no such thing as consent.
Yes, and so I'm also going to challenge Adam on it just being his parents. So if I say this was a global operation, not initiated by your parents. This was a religious corporation who knew what they were doing, used coercive control, and your parents were not in control of their family so much as having to be under the subjection of the Jehovah's Witnesses. In that context, I don't see it as our parents. They were also deceptively recruited. And in fact, I just want you to consider this as an example. One of the things I've mentioned in my submission, which I'm going to come to soon and talk to you about the feedback I've gotten from the legal perspectives, Louise. But before I do, one of the things that I wrote about was the issue of trafficking. So if I give you this scenario, Adam, and then you tell me if it's the parents. My cousin, for example, that Louise has interviewed previously, was a Bethelite and was, one of those people recruited as a budding leader to construct buildings in a third world country in Asia. So he was sent out by the Australian head office to recruit these people to build kingdom halls overseas. We hear them ask for money for Africa all the time. Well, this also happened in places like Southeast Asia. Now, in this scenario, the parents don't realise what's coming for them. They don't know that, this has been cooked up by an organisation in the US and then disseminated out to their colonies like us in Australia. And then Australian people are coming to get them to build properties that will subsequently potentially be sold to pay for redress scheme, children who were abused and are now adults and making claims. They were used for labour. So in some cases, the parents were not present. And so some people were foster children. Some people might have been part of a program independent of their parents. So, yes, some of us came with our parents, but not all of them. And in this case, in this scenario where this was happening in Asia, we now have a trafficking scenario where people are being taken from other countries. Like my cousin, I say, was trafficked to Asia to be used to help construction there. In that scenario, do you think it's just the parents, or that the liability is vicarious and comes back to the watchtower?
Yeah, it does. Actually, when you put it like that, it definitely does. Because when I think about my example of the Kingdom Hall cleaning, my parents take me along to Kingdom Hall cleaning when I'm a child. And if I say no, then I get in trouble. If my parents say no, they don't want to do it, then they get trouble from the elders. If the elders say no, they're not doing it, they get in trouble for it. And it goes on and on and on, doesn't it? Right back to the governing body in the US. So yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Indeed. And this is at the threat of your everlasting life.
Yeah, you're coerced into it. Yeah, no is not an option.
I don't think I'd understood those bigger things that were going on, to be honest, Lara. I understand, the Witnesses is a worldwide organisation that's basically built on volunteer labour and people going out and selling, and then more recently building buildings and selling the buildings. But yeah, I was just still thinking of it as, it's just a bit of hall cleaning. But it's not, is it? It's massive.
I guess from the governing bodies, from the organisation's standpoint, their defence would be, well, look, these people did that work willingly. But the argument against that is, if those people say no and don't do that unpaid work, there are consequences. You'll get an elder's visit, or the circuit overseer will be at your door, or you have privileges taken away from you. So it's not a case of they did it willingly. They did it because there would be consequences if they didn't do it.
And actually, you're right. In the case of field service, there are absolutely consequences, not just, do you think you ought to be helping out with the hall cleaning, brother? But there are absolute consequences of not going out on field service. And field service, obviously, back in the day when you were selling magazines, was labour.
Yeah.
Good. I'm glad it's sinking in. And I want everybody listening to keep an open mind about this as we continue to talk about it. So, I mean, does that argument fly when Ghislaine Maxwell says, they were willing participants?
Yeah,
course, it doesn't fly when it's a non-religious entity. And so I have lots more to reveal. I'll just quickly tell you about a recent conference that I attended in New Zealand to show you how it's dawning on people in other cults as well. And then I'll go back to my submission and I'll explain a few more things that have happened since I first wrote about this, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So I just got back, maybe I think it was November, maybe October. November, I think I was in a conference in New Zealand called the D-Cult Conference. Did you hear about it, D-Cult?
No, I've not heard of that.
Okay. It's a brand new concept, which was initiated in New Zealand by a journalist who's German, and but she lives in New Zealand now. And this conference had 450 attendees. But we are at almost the end of the world. New Zealand's the end of the world. We're the last stop before Antarctica. So I'm not surprised you haven't heard of it. But what was important in that conference is that because I was invited to be a speaker and I spoke on a panel with other Jehovah's Witnesses, there was someone from the UK who spoke, who was originally a New Zealander, called Mickey McCallan. She's got pink hair. She's known as Aposta Barbie. Yeah. There was another gentleman by the name of Shane Meachin who also spoke. He's a New Zealander who's done a lot of support for survivors of child sexual abuse in New Zealand. And then the third person who was also there, another country, Scott Homan. Scott Homan is a movie producer, and he recently released a movie that you can watch on an app called Tubi. And his movie was about Jehovah's Witnesses and music, essentially. And it was a sort of tried to be a positive reflection on how you could have an outlet being a Jehovah's Witness. And so he was there as part of the panel. So I was asked to be a speaker a year before this conference. That's how well organised it was. It had people that included cults like the Children of God, cults such as Gloria Vale, which is a specifically New Zealand cult, who, by the way, are currently in a modern slavery case. Cults like, there was lots of exclusive brethren who get it in some ways worse than us. And so there were representatives of lots and lots of cults and things I haven't heard of, and multi-level marketing, and people talking about the cult of one, which means, well, I don't want to be inflammatory, but a cult of one might be someone like Lloyd Evans. And so that's how they describe it, cult of one. So
I got my podcast taken off air last time we mentioned that name.
Oh, sorry.
No,
it just came to mind so quickly. So the point is, it was this spectacular conference. It was really incredible, and there were lots of people from different cults. And I said to the organizer in the talk, I really want to talk about modern slavery. And she said, no, I don't want you to do that. And I said, but that's the main reason I accepted your invitation. And she said, it's too controversial. So I thought, what am I going to do? I need to people to know this. I need people to hear about it and keep an open mind. Well, luckily for me, 6 other people mentioned it publicly, and half of them were before me. So I took the opportunity to say it anyway. And so I did talk about modern slavery, and you can watch my talk. It was recorded. The panel was recorded. I guess the best thing was that the outcome after the conference was she said to me, thank you so much for raising that topic, because it meant that others could freely talk about it. And we found out about this other cult, Gloria Vale, currently in a court case about it. So it really has opened a can of worms. The other thing is that there have been relatively rarely, but I believe it's about to escalate, news media articles about modern slavery and happening in religious cults. There have been a couple about them. And just about 1 or 2 weeks ago, there was a major news article, global news article, about Opus Dei. Opus Dei are a Catholic cult. Yeah, so they've been accused of modern slavery now in the last 2 weeks. So that's why I'd like people to keep an open mind, because just like in child sexual abuse, we often thought, oh, it's just us. It's just my problem. And this is a similar scenario where, I found out after talking to people about this, somebody had to do free babysitting. Well, that's work. That's work. Perhaps babysit someone else's child.
I'm still traumatized from the time when I babysat for a family at the Kingdom Hall, and when my dad came to pick me up at the end of the night, Uncle Michael was holding out, proffering a £5 note to me, and my dad went, oh no, that's fine, she doesn't need that, and made him take it back with my little goldfish mouth. It feels like yesterday.
My God, Louise, when we have a class action on this in the UK, you remember that
Thank
story.
you. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm sorry to hear that, and I think everybody listening actually will really think about this afterwards and go, yes, I remember this, that, and the other. And I think you might find this is the first podcast I've ever done about this. So I'm really pleased to have this forum to be able to discuss it and have people like you raise the objections and us be able to talk through it. So I really appreciate that.
In seriousness, though, there was a big storyline on The Archers, which is an English soap on the radio, which everybody can laugh at, but I love The Archers. And there was a really long-running serious storyline about modern slavery in the context of builders. And there was a character on The Archers who had married somebody who was running a very successful building firm, and it eventually turned out that he was using young lads that he'd taken off the street and was housing them in a caravan and not paying them, but they thought he'd done them a favour because he had taken them from being homeless to giving them a caravan and a job and an Xbox to play with, and he thought he was doing them a favour because he'd done this, but he was really making them work like loads of hours. And at the end of each, because the storyline ran for a long time, the end of each episode it said, if you know anybody, in modern slavery, and they used the term, there was like a helpline. And I absolutely thought it was a brilliant storyline. So it is out there, it is in the news, obviously in terms of it being in the form of a religion. I think that is quite a new angle for me to have thought about. But you're right, I have been aware of all those others, and especially where I live, it's quite rural around here, Gloucestershire, Herefordshire. There's lots of fruit farms. And there have been, I think there was a big case in Herefordshire where a farmer was keeping people in really awful conditions to pick his strawberries on his farm.
Oh, thank you so much for raising those two. So you've just given the example, an example I wanted to give before, but I forgot. Thank you for that. So your first example reminded me of some people who've been found guilty here in Australia that were Thai massage international workers. So they were brought over, trafficked, brought over, forced to work long hours, which you mentioned. And, they were getting the money from the clients, and the modern slave Thai internationals were not getting that money, and they were being held against their will, but both thinking, oh, I'm lucky I'm in Australia. And then, the owner's going, oh, I didn't, it sort of happens, it just sort of happens, and then it becomes a structured thing, and then suddenly they're a criminal, they're taken advantage of. And then that second issue, that also happens here. So when you're working on farms, that's a big issue here, that also people come from overseas and they think, oh, I want to work on a farm in Australia, sounds so romantic. Suddenly they're captured, hundreds of kilometres away in the outback, picking mangoes or something like that. And, suddenly it's been weeks and they haven't been in touch with their family because they haven't been allowed to be. So, yeah, those two scenarios are also really valid.
You know who else has brought modern slavery right to the forefront of lots of people's consciousness is Andrew Tate. Have you heard of Andrew Tate?
Yes, good point.
Yeah, he's a vile, horrific piece of misogynistic shit that masquerades as a man. He calls himself an alpha male, and he is currently being charged with human trafficking.
Indeed. And this is that sex work that people say, oh, you consented to that. No, some people might be physically held. We were psychologically held, sometimes physically and psychologically. But I do want to go back to a term you used before, which was in regards to the field service, and because you've just given me like lots of more examples, so people can see this is similar but different, but the structure around it is the same. Now, the field service actually has two components of forced labour. Mm-hmm. The first one is the one I mentioned before, which is selling literature. When we were children, we were selling, the Bibles, the tracts, the magazines. Mm-hmm. Now, we thought, and this is why I say we were deceptively recruited, well, in multiple ways, but we thought that it was not for profit. But if you go and have a look at Paul Grundy's website, JW Facts, you'll find that it was actually for profit. So we all thought as children, and our parents thought, oh, we're in a non-for-profit organisation and we're going to do this because it's going to save people's lives. But what if I said, go and have a look at JW Facts and you'll find it was for profit? How do you feel then?
That feels like slavery then.
Yeah.
What do you think Watchtower's defence of this is? Because surely it will inevitably, this will grow and it will come to a point where there is a lawsuit against either the organisation as a whole or a branch office. What's Watchtower's defence?
Now that is a really brilliant question. Let me come back to that in just 1 second. So the second component of field service is the recruitment of new members. So not only are you selling, but you're trying to recruit new members to also sell. So there's two aspects to the field service. Now, the recruitment of new members is constant when you're a Jehovah's Witness. Oh, you think, I just went out into field service, 2 to 4 hours on the weekend. No, you constantly tried to recruit new members, whether it was at school when you're a child, whether it was fellow teachers if you were at work, whether it was your neighbour when you were at home, whether it was someone in the shopping centre. Constant recruitment. Now, that's a sales job for which you weren't paid. So I just want people to think about all of these different things and how they coalesce into a lot of work. Let me answer your question because that's a great question. So I wrote this submission, which I'll come to shortly, but I wrote this submission 6 years ago now. I wrote a 1-page submission to the parliamentary inquiry into modern slavery because Australia was introducing a bill. They introduced a modern slavery bill, which became law. Now, the Watchtower follows me. They stalk me. They know what I do, and they've said nothing. They have said a lot about other things that I've written about and have publicly been in media stories. On this topic, they've been completely silent. And I don't know if it's because I have opened such a can of worms that they're terrified and don't want to. What's that saying about the Barbara Streisand effect? They don't want to bring attention to it.
Yes. Yeah.
Or if they don't see it as an issue. And it may be a bit of both. It may be they think, oh, no one's cottoned onto this, so we don't need to worry about it. Or it may be this is such a risk for us that we're going to be silent for as long as possible because the others haven't agreed and haven't gone along with this as yet. Now, that's all changed last year. So if I can now, I'll just pause for a minute so you guys can ask questions or we can discuss further, but I really want to take you into the second submission I made.
Go ahead. Take us into your second submission. This is really interesting.
So what happened was that after my first submission, no one took any notice of it, not even the government. And I found that really disheartening. I was really disappointed. And not only that, other people didn't really take note and say, yeah, this is a big issue. So obviously I had time to think about that and why that is. And so it wasn't until 5 years later, so just about a year and a half ago, what happens is with parliamentary inquiries and the law, people are often, the government often reviews new laws after 5 years. Mm-hmm. Certainly when it's a new law and if it's an important law, they review it in a parliamentary inquiry. So what happened is this law came up for review. This new law that I'd written a 1-page submission about came up for review. And I thought I need to do a much better job. Clearly I had no impact. I really need to describe this, which are the things we've been talking about, and, really cover it so anybody picking it up gets it. So that's what I did. I spent quite a number of months writing a very long submission. It's about 40 pages. And I put in evidence and I described what we had to do. And I put in examples with photos. And for example, I'll just call it up on my computer. But just I put in. Do you remember we used to have to fill in? I'll just see what the form's called. We used to have to fill in those slips at the end of the week or at the end of the month. We had to fill in the slips for witnessing. What were they called again?
S8. Wait, we used to call it an S8.
Was S8 was it S8 or was it something else? S8 does stick for some reason.
Yeah.
Right. Let's go with that. So I'll find the name shortly. But here it is here. It's called the Field Service Report. So it was S04E over here. You might have had a different one because you know that in different countries there were different ones. It's a Field Service Report. You had to put your name, you had to put the month, you had to put in how many placements you had, this is a modern one, sorry. How many video showings, how many hours, return visits, number of Bible studies conducted. So it's different to the older one. This is the 2015 Field Service Report that I've put in as an example. You are basically putting in a timesheet with that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right?
You are.
You see that?
Yeah.
And they collected this information. Now, there's another one called the Congregation Field Service and Meeting Attendance Report, which gets consolidated and gets provided to Bethel, right? And that's got your congregation name, how many publishers there are, how many auxiliary pioneers, how many regular pioneers, how many meetings they attended. They collected all this information. How stupid. But now we have it. They have it. That letter that you read out at the start, Adam, you know, these things count as evidence. So I put things like this into my second submission, which is why it's so long, and described how this is happening. But I didn't stop there. I also have given testimony, that is evidence at parliamentary inquiries about slave labour, or let's call it modern slavery. And I've also contacted a lot of people in the modern slavery industry and said, hey, this is what happened to us. So I didn't stay silent this time. I really went all out. Not only that, you had a parliamentary inquiry in the UK last year on modern slavery. Louise, you may know that. Adam, did you know that?
I didn't know that, no.
Yeah, the House of Lords. I
didn't know it.
Oh, sorry. I thought I told you.
No, sorry.
So last year, the House of Lords conducted a modern slavery parliamentary inquiry, and I wrote to that as well. I used my Australian modern slavery submission, the long one. I adapted it and extrapolated the numbers for the UK. And I asked my friends to also make a submission so that they knew that I wasn't alone in this and that it had happened to other people. And so I think 6 people from 5 separate countries made submissions to the House of Lords Modern Slavery Parliamentary Inquiry. And you can read about them because they're now in the public domain. They were all published. Okay. And we appeared in the final report where the House of Lords accepted our evidence by publishing it and discussed the fact that this could be an issue in religious cults in the final report. Some of the people who made a submission were John Viney. He's very well known in your country. And John discussed his field service, for example, and you can read about that. So what ended up happening is, out of all the people who made submissions to the House of Lords Modern Slavery Inquiry, Jehovah's Witnesses were more than 5% of all submissions received. Now that's a big change.
Yeah,
that's a massive thing. These people that I've spent time with talking about what happened to them raised new issues I didn't realise. Like, I had been gardening, but I hadn't put that in my submission. And someone said, oh, yeah, I did gardening. I'm like, oh, my God, that's the 6th piece of slavery I've heard of. And then somebody else said, yeah, I had to babysit children, which I hadn't done. And I said, oh, that's the 7th thing. So now when I go back to my original submission, I'll just tell you about where that's led to. So I'm now in Australia, have been part of the lived experience modern slavery group that works with the government to help to prevent modern slavery. And so all of this information is can be used by government, but I also do work about once every fortnight we meet, and there's about 50% of the people in the group are from religious cults.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's growing. Now, you also have a group in the UK called the Survivor Alliance. Anyone can join the Survivor Alliance on modern slavery. I've joined it because I spend a lot of time in the UK. But it doesn't just have to be me. It can be male or female. They would love to get more males to contribute because it's a female-heavy group. So it would be great if people listening to this who are men who feel that they were a modern slave becomes part of the Survivor Alliance in the UK. And this is also being extended to other countries, other Commonwealth countries. For example, New Zealand is trying to introduce such a bill. Canada is also progressing. So you're going to see more of this. So it's great to be talking about this for the first time. I'll now talk about what legal steps I've made. I'll pause there just in case you want to discuss any of that you've just heard.
I'm going to ask the references that you've made, Lara, to the report from the House of Lords in the UK and the Survivor Alliance website. Louise, could we post links to these in the notes to this podcast?
Absolutely. I was just going to say we'll do that. Yes. And I think perhaps, when I think about it and the field service element, I wasn't really, I pioneered, but I know some people spend all of their summer holidays as children putting in pioneer hours and then going on to pioneer and losing out on credible careers and futures because of that. So that I think there are probably people out there that have been massively impacted by the amount of labour that they had to put in as a child into a group that they wouldn't have chosen to do, and they might particularly want to be represented on that Survivors Alliance.
I agree with that. Also, one of you mentioned earlier about not being allowed to not do it. And I know of many people who were subjected to domestic abuse because they didn't want to participate. I mean, I know children who were really badly beaten because they tried to not go. And so many of the men in particular became construction workers, like builders, tilers, labourers, carpet installers, tree loppers. A lot of them went into trades. And so a lot of them had a positive experience because they said, oh, I learnt these skills and I went into trades. But don't forget the beatings. Don't forget, it might have been a good experience for you, but not for your sister, because your sister didn't become a tradesman and they were just used for cooking and cleaning and not just construction. And the Watchtower was using you for your labour, as can be shown from the multi-billions of dollars worth of property that they're now selling off. You were used. So don't forget those things. Yeah, so if I go now to what's happened since then legally, because here in Australia we're sort of neck and neck with the UK, really. We might be slightly ahead because we are the only two countries that have an anti-slavery commissioner. You have one, and we now have two. So we have an anti-slavery commission in New South Wales, and we have an anti-slavery commission or commissioner federally, nationally. So we have two. So it's getting more attention. And hopefully the other countries I mentioned, New Zealand and Canada, will get these. New Zealand's trying to fight it, I think, because there's so many cults in New Zealand, and they can probably see this coming now that we've made it public. Yeah. That's what the Decult conference was all about. So what's happened is I got free legal advice. There's a company here in Australia called Anti-Slavery Australia, and they provide legal advice if you contact the hotline. So we also have a hotline for modern slavery. And if you contact the hotline and report that you allege that you're a modern slave or were a modern slave, either as a child or an adult, you can get free legal support. And so this is what I did a couple of years ago. And they gave me a whole lot of things that I could follow. One of the things that I could follow is making a police statement. I have approached the police in Victoria, where I lived as a child, and also the Australian Federal Police. They're the national police. So there are complications with making the Jehovah's Witnesses accountable. And one of the legal issues is the fact that the law was implemented when I was an adult.
Right.
The modern slavery legislation didn't exist when I was a child.
And so you can't backdate legislation, can you?
Well, there's currently work being done around this because slavery was abolished in your country and mine before we were born. So there's some confusion with us as survivors and the advice we're being given since slavery was abolished, even before this legislation was in place. So that's being followed through with a number of us. And because the new federal anti-slavery commissioner wants to understand why there's so few cases that are successful with the Australian Federal Police. And I think that's one of the issues. The police complain that we don't approach them. And then when we do approach them, they often find an excuse not to investigate. That's happened with a number of. And really that happened in the child sexual abuse case. So I'm not unfamiliar with having to keep at it for years. So that's one issue. The second issue, there's a number of issues, but I'll just talk about the second issue because I probably talked about this for long enough. But the second issue is the amount of work, the volume of work, the hours per week. Now, there is an acceptance in Australia, at least, that a certain amount of work for your church with your community is appropriate for a child. So, for example, here we play football, play cricket. You know, it's expected you're going to bring out the mats, or it's expected that you're going to, you know, help out with the drinks or the pies or whatever. It's accepted that there's a certain amount of work and that you'll get something from it. And also with you know, the Catholics, they have the choir boys or you know, helping in the church. I don't know what they do clearly because I was never a Catholic, but you know, they help.
I was just saying we're talking about a limited amount, aren't we? We're talking about a limited amount of light work, whereas as a contrast in the witnesses, it's all encompassing, isn't it? It takes up your life.
Exactly. That's the point. And so I can easily argue that one, because if you add up all those 7 things I said, the gardening, the selling magazines, the babysitting, the cleaning, the food preparation, the constant recruitment of strangers, you know, when you add that all up, it might be 20 hours a week, you know, at least 10 hours a week. That's extraordinary for a child to have a part-time job for which they're not paid, to which they don't consent. That's well above the hours that I say should be expected. And as one of you mentioned earlier, you know, people missed out on an education and a good job because of the amount of time that they dedicated to this. So that's essentially it.
It's an incredible amount of work that you've done, Lara. It's superb.
Yeah, that's what I do.
It is what you do. What is also interesting, because obviously my son's 17 now. When he was about 13, he was really desperate to get a paid job, and there is really strict legislation in England about how old a child has to be and how much work they're allowed to do and what type of work they're allowed to do. So they're not allowed to do anything before 13, I don't think, as in a paid job. And then at 14, it's so many hours, and it's like they can't work. They can wash cars, but they can't work in a garage, that kind of thing. There's really strict distinctions about what you can and can't do to protect children's education, because it eats so much of the time up, even a small job, even a Saturday job. And when he started sixth form to do his A-levels, one of the first things the school did was send home an information sheet about children working jobs, because obviously at 17 they can, and really strongly recommending against them having any paid work while they were doing their A-levels, because it takes up so much of the time and effort and energy. Joseph works one evening a fortnight sticking pins for a Skittles team, and on the Friday following it, he's knackered. He complains about being exhausted for school the next day, and he's like, he's a 17-year-old. He's supposed to stop a play. But
I'm so glad you raised that, because that's reminded me, because that's a really, really good example of two things. The first thing is, here in Australia, as you know, we copy all of our laws from you, right? So this is probably existing in your country too. But here in Australia, we now require a permit for children to work. I'm talking about children, so not teenagers of 18, children under 16.
Same. Yeah, okay. Same.
Okay, great. So they're now required to have a permit. Now, I asked the Ombudsman where I was a child and worked, do Jehovah's Witnesses ever ask for a permit for children to work, or any adults? They couldn't, clearly for privacy reasons, they can't tell me about individual cases, but they weren't aware of this. They weren't aware, which tells me that they haven't got any permits. Because what they do give permits for is things like in the film industry, in the television industry, they give permits. So there was advice about that, but not for religious institutions. So there's a factor that will affect younger children now. So the potential for younger children to make a claim is much higher, or parents on behalf of their children to make a claim is higher than for us. It's an easier pathway. The second thing that you mentioned about Joseph doing that work and being tired.
On the point of permit, a garage offered. Joe went round the local garages and asked if they wanted a car washer when he was younger, and they said you need to get a permit from Gloucestershire County Council, and they gave me the website to get the permit. So that's really interesting. Yeah, so that's from the age of it says when a child is compulsory school age, is employed to work after school at weekends or during school holidays, the law states that they must be registered for work with their local authority, who will issue a work permit.
And by that token, Louise, knowing that now go back and look at Joseph as a Jehovah's Witness child, if he was. Now, if you were sending him to a construction site today, do you consider in your mind that you would be sending your child into modern slavery?
I mean, as a parent, I wouldn't have thought that I was sending him to modern slavery. I would think that I was saving his eternal life by supporting him to work for Jehovah. And at no point in that thought process would I understand that I needed a work permit.
But now, today, after this conversation, how do you feel?
I mean, yeah, because I've just looked on our Modern Slavery Commissioner's website for the UK, and it defines modern slavery as anything that involves obviously violence, but coercion, which is what you do to your children to ensure that they're towing the religious line, isn't it? You kind of coerce them. So,
yeah, but and you're deceptively recruited too. So I mean, I don't know, Adam. I mean, this is the first time for you. You've never heard of this. What do you think? How do you feel about this now? Can you see that?
I mean, it's certainly. I've never thought along the more it starts to make sense to me. I was just thinking of something that that a work colleague said to me when I was about 17. It was my first job, and I'd worked there for about 6 months. And we discussed, a large part of what life is like for witnesses. And she said to me words to the effect of, "You've been deprived of your childhood."
Mm.
And
Yeah.
when you put that in the context of slavery, that is exactly how you would describe someone who's been a modern slave.
Yeah.
There's a lot of aspects of the life that I now think, well, actually, yeah, it did feel as if there was no option there. I was coerced into doing that. And like you say, there's a number of areas, isn't there? There's the selling literature, there's the child minding, there's the gardening, there's the cleaning. It's all encompassing, really.
Yeah, that's right. And I think it doesn't dawn on you straight away. I was there at a training session about modern slavery. That's why it dawned on me. I mean, I listened to them talk about this stuff for 2 hours, and then it dawned on me. This is the first time you're hearing it and absorbing it and thinking about it. You will probably find that over time you'll go, yeah, that's right. Now, I know, because I now have a Facebook group on Jehovah's Witnesses forced child labour or modern slavery, and I created a petition about a year ago, and 1,000 people have signed it. Now, I thought that lots more people would sign, but I think a lot of people haven't realised. They haven't had the opportunity to listen to something like this and have it dawn on them. Because I think the word slavery, you think, oh, I wasn't in shackles. Oh, I wasn't whipped. But this is modern slavery. That doesn't happen in modern. And so I think after this, after people listen and share and talk about it, there will be a lot more people that will see discussing it. So again, I really thank you for your time and for exploring it and letting me challenge you.
No, absolutely. Just to go back to something we mentioned before, what do you think Watchtower's defence is on this?
I think they would blame the parents, as they do. They always blame the parents, and they say it's your own ministry these days, and they say we don't take care of children. They still follow that line. They would say I'm being defamatory, because that's what they usually say about things I reveal, the truths, and they would get employment lawyers. This is separate to, so child sexual abuse comes under abuse law. This comes under employment law, and they're going to have to get employment lawyers and get up to speed with legislation on modern slavery and employment law, because of the lawyers I've spoken to, they believe me. And even though there might be loopholes, and the Jehovah's Witnesses will certainly try and exploit the loopholes, that the fact that we're making submissions when the law is crafted or the law is being reviewed is trying to close those loopholes. So they'll probably fight it tooth and nail like they do everything else. But I see in the future potential class actions on this, or in fact a redress scheme on this. And I can say that with about 50% certainty, because a few months ago we had a visit from the United Nations. There was someone called the Special Rapporteur into contemporary forms of slavery. That's essentially the same as modern slavery. He's based in York. Louise, you'll appreciate that.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah, you're from York, but he's actually Japanese, but he lives in York. He's part of the UN, and he's a special rapporteur. That means he goes to different countries and reviews where particular topics that are relevant to the UN are at. So he just did a visit to Australia, and he will be doing a report on where we are. And I've seen his interim report, and his interim report talks about how we're ahead of the curve, but the religious cult experiences were shared with him. So I think watch this space, Adam.
And as this comes to the fore, do you think that Watchtower will quietly be removing certain articles and certain publications from their website?
Most certainly. So indeed, and to actually part B of the answer to your question before, you said, what do you think Watchtower will do? So I was really surprised about the letter. I thought, they're taking the piss, aren't they, with that letter? I mean, they must have read one of my submissions. They must be aware of it by now. I'm not quiet about it. It's on my public profile. I've put it on. It's on the Say Sorry website. I've put it on the. I'm now the vice president of the Secular Association of New South Wales. It's on that website. It's on my LinkedIn profile. I've talked about it in the DCOT conference, so they must have heard because they follow me, as I said. So I was really surprised to see this letter come out, but I wasn't surprised to see those forms we discussed earlier be removed. So you remember a year ago, they stopped the reporting of witnessing hours.
For publishers, yeah.
Yeah, and everyone said, why are they doing that? Why are they doing that? And I thought, I know why. They don't want to have records.
For the next big thing coming up, the next big...
The average witness must also, and perhaps still is, wondering, why did they make that massive change? But they're probably all too deliriously happy to...
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so true. You're so right. I didn't want to burst their bubble.
You had to get your 10 hours in or you'd get a visit from the elders.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that goes back to why, thinking about field service, it was coercion, because you would get, and it wasn't just a light touch. It was this is a hard and fast. You will not be a Jehovah's Witness if you're not putting 10 hours in.
That's right. It was essentially a contracted requirement. If you think about your baptism as an everlasting contract, even for a child who's baptized, it's an everlasting contract. That's worse than the Scientologists. They have only a 1 billion year contract. Ours is everlasting. And this is a requirement of the contract that you donate your labor. I mean, it's madness. It's so easy. I think when the bugs get ironed out, I think this is going to be so easy because we've got an immense amount of evidence, all the photos, all the videos, all the records. I've got records in my calendar and my diaries about when I went witnessing and who I was with and, sometimes how many hours I did and, the location I was at. I mean, who hasn't got some of their return visit slips in an old briefcase?
Yeah.
We've got the evidence. This is easy. This is much easier than the child sexual abuse. And most important thing is this. It's a crime. Shunning is not a crime, right? We need to make it a crime, but it's not currently a crime. Modern slavery is a crime, just like child sexual abuse. It's the most easy crime as a community that we can prove happened to us.
So interesting. And I think you're right, Lara. I think the more we think about it and talk about it, the more it lands. Because at first I was just thinking, well, doesn't every community get the children to do stuff? But it's not just that. It's more than that. It's not. And when I think about other churches, say a child that's a member of a local church, that child does not have to donate every spare minute of their time for their entire childhood to the financial benefit of the church.
That's right. The number of hours must be at least double what a regular church-going child. And they're not required to provide construction labour, Louise. When did you ever see a child building a cathedral?
Not in the most recent centuries that I've been alive. Yeah.
True. They probably did in the past. But yeah, this is it's a big thing. And I hope people get it after this. It's a big thing.
And I think you're right. I think it has affected everybody, whereas child sexual abuse it's affected a lot of people, mind, but not everybody. There are some people that have been able to leave the witnesses and drift off and think, well, it wasn't that great, but it wasn't horrific. For some people, it was truly horrific because of the abuse. But this has affected everybody that was a member, and every child and every adult.
Yeah, virtually. So some people have said, oh no, that didn't affect me, that's fine. But I would say 95% were affected, because some came in later and some of that stuff had dissipated, and some perhaps, for example, may have been disabled and not able to participate. So there are reasons why it's not 100%, but it's pretty close, I would say.
Yeah.
And what that means is the risk, the liability risk is massive. All we need is a couple of people listening to this in different countries to go to the police, or to go to their anti-slavery commission, or to go to the International Labour Organization and make a report. And suddenly it's going to be on the landscape in a much bigger way than little old me has sort of made it happen. And I hope today is that day of reckoning where it dawns on people and they do something about it, because this is in their control. And you have the evidence. They're welcome to Google my submission.
Well, I'll put all the. I feel like there's going to be a lot of links in the show notes today, but that's really good. I'll put everything that you've referenced that I can find as a link in the show notes. And thank you so much for coming on and talking to us. I feel that we'll probably return to this topic again, because I think it probably bears repeating.
And it will an update at some point in the future to see how things are progressing.
Happy to. I'm now a happy listener of your program. I'm so thrilled, Louise, that you're back in the game, as it were, and I'm so pleased that you have a co-host and that's not me. And because it's a lot of work, Adam, isn't it? It's a lot of work. I appreciate that.
Yeah, it's something that we talked about last year, didn't we, Louise? And it's been very enjoyable so far. We've done 4 episodes, have we?
I can't remember.
4 or 5.
Adam does all the work and I just do the back office stuff, but he does all the research and stuff. I just crack the jokes in between and then tidy it up.
So the format hasn't changed. That works well.
Yeah. That's the same format as normal. What I'm particularly excited about, Lara, is that you said the Watchtower follows you. So I think that may add an extra listener to our 2 this week.
Oh yeah, good point. Just remember that they will lie to get your podcast off the air. So last time they lied and said that your logo was trademarked when it never was. So don't be so quick to take this podcast off the air. I hope it lasts.
I didn't
please
take
stick with
it off. It was a fellow ex-Jehovah's Witness that kept reporting it to YouTube, because YouTube's a free platform. If you have 3 complaints, they just take all your content down, and he just kept complaining repeatedly but the podcast hosts who I use are amazing, and they didn't back down in the face of complaints because I pay for the service, and they were very robust, and it never got taken. My podcast never got taken off the podcast
my
platform.
Misunderstanding.
Yeah,
sorry, I misunderstood that.
No, the Watchtower don't care about me, Lara. I'm nobody. I'm nobody to them. I'm nothing. I don't even know I exist.
I think your service and that with Adam is extremely important. And I avoided podcasts for a long time because I know it's a lot of work. But sometimes there's an issue like this where it's very handy to have a platform. And I really, really do value and appreciate that you've taken it up again. I think it's terrific, and I really want you to be successful. So I'm looking forward to being a listener.
Thank you so much, Lara, and you're always welcome to bring your research and activism to the podcast as a platform. So I'd like to say thank you to everyone for listening.
Thank you, Lara. That was superb. Perhaps just to mention as well that on the show notes will be the email address, as always, for anyone that wants to write in and contact us. It's not who you said.